Today, we'll be talking about extraterrestrials, Bigfoot, sleep demons, and much more. All coming up on this episode of Paranormal Mysteries. Thank you all for joining me, and welcome to Paranormal Mysteries. I am your host, Nick Ryan. I hope everyone's had a great week, and before we start today's episode, I'd like to thank Kara and Dana for their support and generosity. And if you enjoy the show, please consider following, sharing, and reviewing the podcast. This supports us by helping new listeners to discover the show. You can also support us by becoming a patron at patreon.com/paranormalmysteries, or by donating at buymeacoffee.com/paranormal. And if you'd like to share your paranormal encounter on the podcast, you can write to me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com, or by visiting our website at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com. Or if you prefer to record your experience and send it to me, you can now do this on our website as well. You can also visit speakpipe.com/paranormalmysteries and record your story there. All of these links can be found in the show notes. And with that in mind, today's first story comes to us from Michael. And Michael says, "Greetings, Nick. I have been having visitations by beings, and I am an eyewitness to UFOs since childhood. The experience that bothers me the most is when I and a then card-playing buddy were up late playing cards. He kept telling me all evening that he would have to quit early as they had an early AM shift. As they were taking me home, they missed 3 street turns, and they just kept on driving, and this was February 2nd of 1988. I told him that he had missed all of the turns, and he looked at me and said, 'We're going to save its life.' Right after they said that, I began to feel a mild sense of sedation, sort of like the state before a surgery is performed. We drove out of Chico, California, up Highway 32, and we had just been up this way the weekend before, when we went snowshoeing at Mount Lassen. On the way up, he said a word to me that sounded Celtic. It was either Clydee or Clydub. He pulled over to the side of the road in a pullout, and he informed me that we were here. After he said that, there was a strange electronic-sounding beep that came from just behind his side of the car. We both had to urinate, so we went to separate trees and then rejoined up and went toward the sound of running water. We were on a path that split. One led off to the left, and the other led to the right, and it was at that point that I looked over in his direction, and on either side of him were 2 small beings that had large heads and eyes, and there was also a Bigfoot. I then turned and realized that I was being escorted by the same thing. As they led him off to the left toward a landed craft, I inquired to the nearest small being, "Why are they taking him over there?" I was then told via telepathy, "He's not the same as you." And then I was walked, which felt like I was floating, to the craft where I could clearly see that there were stairs. But my next memory was being in a small room. There was mist or smoke that clung to the ground everywhere inside, and at first I thought that this room was round, but I realized that it was actually shaped exactly like a stop sign. I was lying down, but whatever I was on was completely invisible. My memories of that night to this day aren't completely clear, but there were 3 beings in the room with me. 2 were about 3 feet tall, and the third was a bit over 4 feet tall. What had looked like a wall actually had a bunch of concealed drawers, and that is where they got out instruments that they used on me. The instrument that would have taken a sample of sperm failed, and somehow without me seeing any doors open, suddenly there was a female. She had sparse reddish-brown colored hair and looked a little more human than the others, and I don't know or remember how it was accomplished, but they got their samples from me. I was then shown by the taller gray being a 3D galaxy map, and they kept saying, "This is where we come from." I didn't recognize any of it, and since my memories are fuzzy, I don't know if I would recognize it now. I was told by this female that I would be having a daughter, and they were going to raise her in their way for 5 years, and then I would raise her in human ways for 5 years. But to my conscious mind, I don't know if I've ever met my own daughter. We then both quickly went back to the car and got in. He looked at me and said, "We saved its life." He was very excited about doing this, and as we went back to Chico, we saw 2 huge red orbs arc from the left of the car to the right of the car in the sky, and during these experiences, I was suddenly excited myself by what I had just seen. And this was, unbeknownst to me, far from being over. Upon our return, I was followed by huge black helicopters with no markings, and was also followed by black cars with black windows, so I couldn't see anybody inside. I told another person about the experience and how I was being followed, and they didn't believe me. Until one night. We had been out to eat, and he was followed by a large black car, and then he said that he believed my story. I have, since this experience, lost contact with the person I shared the experience with, and I have heard that they have become a hardcore alcoholic, and I have also heard that they have become a patient in a California mental hospital. I don't know what the truth is, but they wouldn't ever discuss that night with me, and every time I asked about what had happened, he would get very nervous, and then would get argumentative, and would shout out for me to shut up, so I may never find out what exactly happened with them that night. I have moved several times since then, and no matter where I have moved to, I am still experiencing ongoing abductions. I do want to pursue regressive hypnosis, if nothing more than to fill in the blanks that riddle my memories. My first UFO sighting was when I was 13. It was a huge cigar-shaped craft, and it looked as if it was going to either explode or crash. My dog's hair stood on end, and she growled at the craft, and this was in 1972. Because of all that I have been through, I have become both a paranormal investigator and an ordained minister. I have had a lifetime of being, as I call it, a weirdness magnet, and almost nothing freaks me out anymore. I hope that this at least gives you an idea of what sort of things I have been through, and I am open to any questions that you might have. Sincerely, Michael. Our next story of the night comes to us from Sam, and Sam's story is called Sleep Demons. Sam says, "So I never believed in ghosts or the supernatural until I saw it for myself. First things first, my family is full of hardcore Christians, and we don't believe in things like ghosts or anything like that. But after this encounter, I am open to anything. It was early summer or even late spring, and I was at my home in northern Ohio. We lived in a 19th century farmhouse that had been remodeled in the 80s, and let's just say that things were always creepy here. My cousin committed suicide in our yard a few years before I was born, and local authorities found some black magic cult sacrificing animals in the nearby woods across the lake. But what I'm about to tell you is a new horror I never thought could happen. It was a warm night, and I was in the upstairs bedroom that I shared with my brother at the time, and since our house was so old, we didn't have AC, so we always had our windows open. This particular night, it was quite warm, and there was an all-around strong feeling of fear, which was weird because I was home in my comfort zone, and I was happy, so I didn't know why I was so on edge. I fell asleep around 11 or 11:30, and for a few hours, it was just a normal night. All things were quiet, and my dad, who was an 8-year Army veteran who had survived Desert Storm, was just making sure we were all asleep, and making sure the doors were locked. He said that he heard scratching noises on the side of the house, and it sounded like it was going to the roof, but he just ignored it, thinking it was just the wind blowing the trees against the house. So around 2 or 3 is when it started to happen, and I remember waking up, but not being awake, while I was unable to move or even blink. But I could see everything around me just like I was awake. It felt like hours while I was just laying there with my eyes open, hoping something would happen to wake me up so I could finally get out of whatever was happening to me. But before I could even finish that thought, I saw it. A long black leathery hand curled around the window frame. I lost it. I had no idea what it was. Maybe just a hallucination, or just my eyes playing tricks on me. Until I saw another hand come around the corner, and the top of a dark silhouette slowly showed itself in the frame. What the hell is happening, I thought. It's just a dream. I have to be dreaming. And just as I thought that, it started to crawl in the window. I have no way to describe this, but it was like a man that was very, very skinny and hairy like a dog, but also like the Slender Man, or maybe a werewolf, I don't know. But it slunk down and started to crawl along the bottom of my brother's bed and towards me. Its foot or something must have caught the dresser because it knocked a Lego set off and it went falling down the stairs, and the creature immediately crawled under the bed, and my dog came up the stairs growling and sniffing before she looked at me and then laid down on my bed. Then I heard footsteps. It was my dad. He had come upstairs to see what the noise was. He stopped on the top of the stairs and looked around, and then he made his way back downstairs. As soon as he was gone, the thing crawled out from underneath my brother's bed and came over to me, and it started to stroke my head with its long, greasy fingers as I tried my hardest to scream or move and fight back. I could see its pale white eyes shining in the dark, and its pale, yellow, dog-like teeth. It started to grab my feet, and I heard my dog start to bark and growl. She tried to attack the thing, but it just hit my dog and she went running down the stairs whimpering. With my feet in its hands, it started to pull on me and take me off my bed, but I could hear rapid footsteps downstairs, and it was my dad again as he was coming back to see what was happening. Then the monster let me go and ran out the window, and my dad got upstairs to see me half off the bed, with burn marks around my ankles, and blood dripping from my eyebrows where the thing had touched me. I told him what I saw when he had shaken me to wake up, but he didn't believe me. Then he saw that my dog had the same burn marks as me from where she got hit. I'm not sure what I saw that night, or what was trying to take me, but whatever it was, I hope it's gone forever. Our next story of the night comes to us from Megan, and Megan's story is called The Lady in White. Megan says, "Hi Nick, love your podcast. I wanted to share a story with you that has been told to me by my mother. I have her permission to share it with you. When I was younger, maybe 4 or 5, my family all went camping in Maine. I'm from Vermont, so this was a common place to go. My uncles and aunts and cousins all went together. I'll leave the name of the campground out. It was a very large campground, the type where it would be difficult to give directions to your campsite. My mom took myself and my older sister to the bathrooms, and while on our way, my mom heard a woman yelling, 'Does anyone know CPR?' in a panic. My mother was in LNA school at the time, so she went to help the panicked woman, figuring she could help in some way. She told us to stay by the bathrooms and to not go anywhere and just wait. When she went to help, she saw this woman's little son choking on something, so my mom started to perform the Heimlich maneuver instead of CPR on the choking boy. My mother was working on this boy when he went unconscious in her arms, and she was begging anyone to help, as she could not get whatever he was choking on up. Then, almost out of nowhere, a woman all dressed in a long flowing white gown seemed to glide over to her and the unconscious boy. My mom said it was very odd because that attire is not something anyone would ever wear while camping, or anywhere for that matter, but she didn't pay attention. She needed help keeping this boy alive. That's when this woman reached her hand to the boy and placed 2 fingers on his forehead and said, 'With the power invested in me, let this boy stop choking.' And just like that, he stopped and gained consciousness. My mom, shocked, looked up and watched the woman glide into the crowd and vanish. The mother of that boy had to go meet the ambulance at the campground entrance because the campground was so big the ambulance could not find them. She went to get in her car when she slipped, fell, and broke her ankle. The boy was okay, and they were staying in cabin 13. After things calmed down and the crowd dispersed, my mother searched and searched the campground trying to find the woman in the white gown, wanting to thank her, and could not find her anywhere. She told everyone about the woman, and no one had seen her, let alone could find her. Since then, my mother refuses to stay or own anything that includes the number 13. With any hope, the little boy who is all grown up now can hear this story and know this truly happened, and can share an amazing story of a real-life angel. Thanks for your show. I love hearing these stories. Megan. Our next story comes to us from Brianna, and Brianna's story is called Loved Ones. Brianna says, I have always had an interest in the paranormal and supernatural, but my interest of these things really skyrocketed after my grandpa had passed in April of 2018. Here's why I say that. I believe everyone has some sort of sixth sense within them to help them recognize situations to be wary of, or stay on guard because something bad is about to happen. I've had this feeling several times. It's like there's a knot in my stomach and a voice in the back of my head telling me to keep my eyes open and stay alert. The week before my grandpa died, I had this exact feeling. We all knew he wasn't feeling well, but even after multiple doctor visits, the doctors brushed it off like he was fine. I was a junior in college at the time, and it was a Monday. I had several classes to attend that day, and since I had the stomach flu the week prior, and couldn't make it then, I knew my professors would not be happy if I missed another day. But something in the back of my mind kept telling me that if I was to drive to my classes that day, which were roughly an hour from my house, I would regret it. I've had that gut feeling before, and I decided to trust it, so I stayed home. I figured the feeling would subside as the day went on, but it never did. It almost seemed to get worse, and around 3 p.m., my grandma called, crying hysterically, saying that something was very wrong with my grandpa. Fortunately, she only lives 2 minutes away, and I was there in no time. I stumbled up their deck and into the front door, and turned to my grandma who was on the phone with 911. I then looked over to my grandpa sitting on the couch, aggressively shaking, not speaking, and looking at me with scared eyes. I already knew he was having a stroke. I ran over to him and grabbed his hands, hoping that maybe I could put some ease to his mind. "You're going to be okay, Papa," I said. "You'll be just fine." But I knew he wouldn't be, and immediately started crying. To my surprise, he let go of my hands and wrapped both of his arms around me in a very tight embrace, his usual hugging style. We stayed that way for several seconds before his arms dropped and the ambulance came. After that, he was not able to move. A week later, on April 18th, he passed away at 7:52 in the morning because of complications from the stroke. The drive home from the hospital was tense and depressing, but I found it comforting for that hour-long car ride that my car smelled like him, as if he had just finished getting ready and put on his aftershave and cologne, and wanted to go for a ride. He loved back-roading, which is something I did with him and my grandma for years. But there was one thing that I found odd, and still do, as I can't quite pinpoint what it was that I saw. During that week while my grandpa stayed in the hospital, my grandma and I did go back to the house for one night to get everything we needed to go back and stay with him. As my grandma was in the back bedroom packing some clothes, I sat in the living room, which has a direct view straight into the kitchen and the hallway next to it that leads to the back bedroom. I was sitting on the footstool in front of the couch, on the phone with my mom. I heard footsteps coming down the hall and into the kitchen. Thinking it was my grandma, I turned my head to tell her who I was talking to, but I only saw a black, shadowy figure come out of the hallway and stop in the kitchen, like it was surprised to see me sitting there. It was the silhouette of what appeared to be a younger man, but as soon as it appeared, it was gone. I was shocked and didn't know how to tell my mom, thinking she might think I was crazy, so I told her I had to check on my grandma, and I hung up. I warily walked through the kitchen and down the hall, only to find my grandma still in the bedroom messing with her clothes, and I decided not to say anything to her, as she was already stressed out about my grandpa. I've never seen that figure again, and have questioned whether maybe it was my grandpa, but I did not get that feeling from it. I continuously hear footsteps and knocks in my grandma's house from time to time, and occasionally I will smell his cologne while sitting in his chair, and I have seen him in my dreams. But with that being said, there was a younger man who used to live in the house long before my grandparents did. There is a building off the side of the house that my grandpa had built onto and turned into his small engine and mechanic shop. But many years ago, in the smaller part of the building, the young man was found hanging from the beams. My grandpa was one of the first ones who found him, as him and my grandma were his neighbors at the time. I have never felt comfortable in that building, with or without people accompanying me. I always get the feeling I'm being watched, and I often wonder if the shadowy figure I had seen was somehow connected to that young man. Even inside the house still, I feel as if something is always watching me, regardless if I'm alone or not, and it's not exactly the most comfortable feeling. My grandma doesn't seem to notice anything though, and it makes me wonder if I'm just freaking myself out. Overall, I don't think I'll ever know what the shadowy figure was, and if I'm being honest, I don't think I ever want to. Our last story of the night comes to us from Jess, and Jess's story is called Dream Premonitions. Jess says, "Greetings, Nick. This story isn't particularly mine, but my mother's, who is very excited to have her story read on this podcast. I came across your podcast just a few days ago and have already listened to the better part of 50 or so episodes. I want to thank you for this platform y'all have created for stories just like ours. This story starts when my mother was a teenager around 1980 or so. She started to have a dream. She would dream that she was walking into this mansion that had a grand staircase right at the front door. She'd walk in the doors and noticed her family members were at either side of the entrance, except to her knowledge, all this family were family members that had already passed on. She would start to make her way up the staircase, and then see at the top of the grand staircase stood a woman in old-timey clothes. She wore a dress with her hair in a bun, with her hands situated at the front of her stomach. She'd have this dream often, but each step she took closer to the woman, she would wake up. Each time she'd have it, it was the same setting, the same people, and the same entrance, but she'd wake up just before seeing who the woman was. The last time she had that dream was the night she and my father married, and she never had it since, and she never found out who the woman was. Fast forward to around 2007, my mother started having another recurring dream. This time she was entering a room that had a big oval table in it. The room was dark, very dark, and there were lights focused on each person sitting at the table. They were dim lights, not telling very much, but in her dream, people sat at the table, people she knew had already passed on, most of which were from her father's side of the family. I chalked this up to her not being very familiar with my mother's side, as they were several states away, and she wasn't very friendly with her maternal side of the family. Nonetheless, in her dream she'd enter the room and start seeing family members she had not seen in forever due to their passing. She'd see her father's uncle, Uncle Junior, who died in a car accident. Then she'd see her Aunt Pearl, who died of breast cancer in the early 90s. She even saw her Grandpa Bob, but the next person she couldn't see. And just as she was about to approach them, she'd wake up, not knowing who the next person was. Months after having this dream the same exact way, in the same exact order, her grandma, my great-grandma Nana, was put in a nursing home where she lived for the better part of 2 years. She was placed there after living with us for almost 5 years. The care she needed was more than my mother could give, but my mother took care of her the best she could. She bathed her, fed her, gave her meds, and ensured that she made it to every doctor's appointment. My Nana developed Alzheimer's and required 24/7 professional care in the last 10 months of her life. I don't remember her exact age, but I know she was at least 86 when she died, because I remember celebrating that birthday. I moved out and out of state, and time just slipped me, but if I asked my mom now, she would surely know. After her death, my mother had that dream again. She passed by my Uncle Junior, Grandpa Bob, and my Aunt Pearl, and when she got to the next person, she finally saw that my Nana was sitting there. In her dream, she hugged her and told her she missed her so much, and that she was sorry for putting her in the home. But Nana came to her in separate ordeals to assure her that all was well, and that she was okay. Mom stopped having the dream for a few years, but then in late 2010, she started having it again. She would enter the room, greeting Uncle Junior, Papa Bob, Aunt Pearl, and then Nana. But there was another dark shadow creeping up, and as my mom would go to greet this family member, whom she did not know, she would just wake up. But she knew who was next, because in the prior years, my grandfather, her father, had developed lung cancer. She took him to get chemo, but then the cancer was clear. My grandpa was stubborn though, and he couldn't stop smoking or drinking. In fact, the last time he had a drink was 9 days before his passing. My grandpa was a happy drunk, and he loved spending money on his grandkids. He'd take us to carnivals and Disney. He was the best, but his health took a turn for the worse, and in May 2011, my grandfather passed away. A little piece of my childhood died right along with him, even though I was 22 when he died. Nevertheless, my mother had her dream again. My Uncle Junior, my Papa Bob, Aunt Pearl, Nana, and now Mom saw Papa in her dream. They were all there, sitting at this table in the order in which they had died. The dream lay dormant for about 4 years, not to be seen again until early 2016. Then Mom had the dream again, but this time, as soon as she entered the room, she saw my Uncle Charles and asked, "What are you doing here?" As if she knew subconsciously by now that this dream was a dream for those she had known who had already passed away, and to her knowledge, Uncle Charles was still very much alive. In her dream, when asked why he was there, Uncle Charles folded his arms and said, "Emphysema," and my mom thought, "Okay." She made her way around the table and greeted each loved one who had passed on, only to see a new shadow of a person, one of which she wasn't expecting and couldn't totally tell who it could have been. Prior to this, my mom came to tell me about these dreams in real life a few years prior to this new person who she didn't know. She was scared in real life because she knew she had dreamt this dream in the months coming to a new loved one's passing, and at this point, she thought, who was left? Who else on her father's side did she care about or know about enough to dream of their passing? And nothing could prepare her for what was to come. She started having this dream in 2016, and it started with Uncle Charles, even though she knew he was still alive. But this new person, the one she'd wake just before seeing, all came very clear on September 29th, 2016. My husband and I were out to lunch with our son that afternoon when my brother called me. He said, "Are you sitting down?" I said yes, and he said, "Uncle Billy just passed away." I was devastated. This was my mother's brother, my uncle. It's been almost 5 years now, and we still don't know 100% what he passed away from, but my mom knew someone was going to die, and that this was really going to hurt. My uncle's passing shook the entire family and my grandma, as this was her son, and now he's gone. Mom had the dream once more, and she made her rounds around the table, hugging and kissing her family she had known who had since passed. Uncle Junior, Aunt Pearl, Grandpa Bob, Nana, Papa, and now Uncle Billy. But Uncle Charles was there too with his emphysema reasoning. After alerting the family of his passing, they were making their calls and they called Uncle Charles, who lived in Arizona, and we were in Florida. His wife picked up the phone, and my mother told her of my uncle's passing, in hopes of seeing Uncle Charles at the funeral, only to learn that he had passed away 7 months earlier of COPD. I know this story is very long, but I had to include all the details to truly appreciate it. My mother has a gift that is, in other sorts, useless until the person actually passes, or so we thought. She started to dream it again, and now we are preparing for her mother, my grandma, who isn't in great health, to be the next face at the table. But God willing, I hope not. But aside from us, her children, the only one left to lose is my grandma, Mama. Thanks for reading my mom's story. I've been looking for a way to tell it without sounding mental, and again, thank you for creating this podcast for all of us to do so. Maybe someone else has a similar dream premonition of their own. I have literally hundreds of actual ghost stories I want to submit, and trust me, those would be worth the read. Best regards, Jess. As we come to the end of tonight's episode, I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in and supporting the show. And a special thank you goes out to Michael, Sam, Megan, Brianna, and Jess for sharing their experiences. If you've witnessed something paranormal and would like to share your story, please write to me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com or by visiting our website at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com. Or if you prefer to record your experience and send it to me, you can now do this on our website as well. You can also visit speakpipe.com/paranormalmysteries and record your story there. And don't forget that all of our links are in the show notes. Until next time, I hope you all have a great weekend, and I'll see you back here on Monday with our next episode. From everyone at Paranormal Mysteries, thank you for listening, and remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.